All right, welcome everyone. Ready for a deep dive? Today we're cracking open the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, think of it as the ultimate guide to how America works, or at least is supposed to.
No dusty history lessons here, though. We're talking about how this thing, written ages ago, still impacts your life every single day.
We're talking elections, free speech, even what you can and can't post online, all thanks to this one document.
So first things first, for anyone who's slowed through civics class, what is constitutional law exactly? I mean, it's more than just a bunch of rules.
Way more. Think of it as the blueprint for our entire government. It sets up how things are structured, like who has what power.
But it's not just about giving power, right? It's also about limiting it.
Absolutely. The Constitution makes sure that no one, not even the president, gets too much power. That's where all those checks and balances come in that you hear about. No one branch gets to run wild.
Right, keeps everyone in line. So if it's like a blueprint, does that mean it's set in stone, unchangeable?
Not at all. That's what's so cool about it. The Constitution is actually what we call a living document. It gets interpreted differently over time, as society changes.
Okay, so who gets to decide how it's interpreted? Is it like whoever shouts the loudest?
Haha, not quite. It's mainly the courts, especially the Supreme Court, that get to decide. That's what we call judicial review. They basically check if laws passed by Congress or actions by the president actually match up with what the Constitution says.
Powerful stuff. Speaking of powerful, let's break down the structure a bit. Our notes talk about the preamble, the articles, then the amendments. Kind of a lot to unpack.
It might seem overwhelming, but think of it like this. The preamble is the intro, like the mission statement. Then you've got 7 articles. These are the main sections, the meat of the Constitution.
Article 1's all about Congress, right? The lawmakers.
You got it. Article 2 is focused on the president and the executive branch, basically everyone who carries out those laws.
And Article 3, that's where the courts come in, including the big kahuna, the Supreme Court.
Exactly. Now, on to the amendments. The first 10, those are super special. We call those the Bill of Rights.
Ah, yes, the Bill of Rights. That's where all the juicy stuff about our individual freedoms is, right? Free speech, religion, the right to bear arms.
All that and more. It's really the foundation of our individual liberties.
It's kind of mind-blowing that the original Constitution itself is actually pretty short, considering how much it covers.
Yeah, it's only about 4,500 words. But it's the amendments and the court interpretations that really flush it out. It's almost like the Founding Fathers knew they couldn't predict everything the future would hold.
True. They were pretty smart dudes. So even though they couldn't predict, like, the internet and all,
Yeah.
they built in some flexibility.
Exactly. They laid the groundwork, but they also left room for things to evolve. Now, let's get to some key concepts that every law student and really every American should wrap their heads around.
Let's start with that judicial review thing. You mentioned the Supreme Court gets to decide if laws are constitutional. How do they get that power?
It all goes back to this super important case, Marbury v. Madison. It's kind of a long story, but basically this case established the principle of judicial review. It's like the cornerstone of the Supreme Court's authority.
Okay, so Marbury v. Madison, definitely adding that to my study list. Now, what about this federalism thing? I've always found that one a bit confusing.
Yeah, it trips a lot of people up. It's basically the balance of power between the states and the federal government, like who gets to call the shots on what.
So, like, sometimes the state says one thing, but the federal government says another.
Right. Think about the whole debate about legalizing marijuana. Some states have said it's okay, but federally, it's still illegal. That's federalism in action, figuring out who has the final say.
That makes so much more sense now. Okay, last big idea from our notes. Separation of powers. I feel like this one's pretty important, right? Like keeping things from getting too dictatorial.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The separation of powers is all about preventing tyranny. You've got Congress making the laws, the president putting them into action, and the courts making sure everything stays within the lines of the Constitution.
It's kind of like a three-legged stool, right? Each branch has its own job, and they need to work together to keep things balanced.
Exactly. And, sometimes they don't get along perfectly, but that's actually part of the beauty of it. That tension, those checks and balances, are what keep any one branch from getting too powerful.
Okay, so we've covered the structure of the Constitution, some big legal ideas.
Yeah.
But what about us regular folks? Where do we fit in all this?
That's where individual rights come in. This is where the Constitution gets really personal. It's about your freedoms.
And those are mainly covered in the Bill of Rights.
Exactly. Freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. These are the things that protect you from government overreach.
It's amazing how these legal concepts, which can seem kind of abstract, actually play out in our daily lives all the time.
Totally. Think about voting rights, what the president can and can't do, even debates about what's okay to say on social media. It all ties back to the Constitution.
It's almost like it's the invisible code running underneath everything in America.
And that's why understanding constitutional law is so crucial, especially for those of you starting law school. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
You've got the basics, but now the real fun begins. It's about applying these principles to new situations, new challenges.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving.
You're about to explore one of the most important documents in history, a document that's still being debated and interpreted today. The question is, what role will you play in shaping its future?
That's something to think about.
Yeah.
All right, that's our deep dive for today. We'll see you next time, ready to tackle even more constitutional conundrums.
Until then, stay curious and keep those legal minds sharp.